2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm counting.
There have been many great people throughout the course of human history. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, scientists like Sir Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein, men of peace like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. Today I would like to introduce you to my favorite person, me. I grew up in New York with my parents, 2 brothers and my little sister. I lived there until I was 23. Many people say things like we were poor growing up, but we didn't know. Well, we were poor and I was very aware of it. I went to Catholic school for 10 years on financial aid. For high school, I went to a boarding school on scholarship, and then it was off to college on financial aid. As I mentioned, I went to Catholic school for 10 years. I don't want to say the nuns were tough, but I think I have PTSD. I still flinch every time I see a roller. Growing up in the Bronx was pretty tough, but a lot of fun. Anything you wanted to do was just a train ride away. I spent most of my time in Manhattan going to museums like the Met and the Museum of Natural History. I would go to Little Italy for Italian food or Chinatown for Chinese. As I got older, I loved going off to catch off-Broadway plays. I had a good childhood, but it wasn't always fun and games. I was shot at more times before I was 16 than I ever did in my 11 years in the military. When I was 23, I decided it was time for me to move on with my life, and I joined the Army. I left New York and was sucked into the black hole of the Army, Fort Hood, Texas. I was stationed at Fort Hood in 2001 and assigned to Headquarters Battery 282 Field Artillery. When I ETS from the Army in April of 2012, I was assigned to Headquarters Battery 282 Field Artillery. I went to Iraq 4 times during my time at 282. My first tour was in Iraq, definitely the hardest. I spent 12 months living in an underground parking garage. And unlike my other 3 tours, where we flew into country, on my first tour we drove for 3 days from Kuwait to Baghdad. During the first tour, it was also the scariest, where I had some very close calls. On one particular night, I had just gotten off shift and was sitting in my bed, and we took indirect fire. When a rocket landed right outside my window. Luckily for you, it was a dud, and I'm here speaking to you today. The Army wasn't all bad, though. I went to Montana once on a humanitarian mission where I went to fight forest fires. That was an interesting deployment. Unlike the rest of my deployments, where people didn't want to see us, it was the first time we went as heroes, saving people's houses and property. The best thing to come out of being stationed at Fort Hood was meeting my wife, Jen. My wife and I met in April of 2002, and by the fall we were married. After a month of being married, I was out in the field when I got the phone call. My wife was telling me I was going to be a dad for the first time. I was excited, scared, and happy, all at the same time. 9 months later, on August 10, 2003, Michael Jr. was born, and I became a father for the first time. The excitement was short-lived because 7 months later I went off to Iraq. After a year, I came home, and less than a year later, my daughter Haley Jo was born. Again, the excitement was short-lived because 6 months later I was back in Iraq for the second time. But this time for 15 months. Almost 9 months to the day after I got home, my son Johnny was born, and 3 months later I was back in Iraq. I literally missed half of each of my kids' life because of deployments to Iraq. So it was an easy decision for me to leave the military because I was tired of being a part-time dad. Today I'm still in the military, but instead of being a part-time dad, I'm a part-time soldier in the National Guard. I still get to play soldier, and I get to play with my kids. I still feel like serving the community, so I started working in the Crane Unit in Gatesville as a correctional officer. Working at a prison is not what I consider a safe job, so I'm going to school full-time at Central Texas College. I'm working towards my degree in math with a focus in education. So when I graduate, I'm going to become a math teacher. I figure working at the prison is a good start for working with teens. If I can use my experience at the prison to keep a few more troubled kids out of there, I feel like I accomplished something. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my life growing in New York, time as a soldier, what I'm doing today, as much as I like talking about my favorite subject, this guy.